When Tobe Hooper and Mikael Salomon made their adaptations of Salem's Lot in 1979 and 2004, they found it somewhat difficult to bring in everything that was told in the book. And we understand that. You have to restrain yourself to a certain runtime, and it's not impossible to include everything in there. Now, the 2024 adaptation is a movie that's under 2 hours. Naturally, the differences are more in number and more sweeping. So, in this video, we're going to explore just that. The 16 most significant differences between the Salem's Lot movie and Stephen King's book. Before we get into our explanation though, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Ben and Susan meet under different circumstances. Ben and Susan have a pretty sweet first meeting, you know? I mean, he was a famous author, she was a girl who loved his work, a fan to be precise. He comes for a walk in the park and gets wooed seeing her read one of his books while the sun shone on her face. She sees him and has a huge fangirl moment, so much so that she comes with her book asking him to sign it, despite knowing that it was a library. Of course, winds blow, romantic music in the background, sparks fly, and the two fall for each other at first sight. It's a whole different issue that their love doesn't sustain because Barlow turns her. Although the 1979 TV show keeps their meeting more or less the same, the 2024 movie changes this completely, and we can't understand why. In the film, Susan is still pretty much a fan and loves Ben's work. She used to work at Larry Crockett's when Ben came to find an accommodation in Salem's Lot. She was reading his book when they met, but she doesn't immediately recognize him. He has to say his name out loud for her to know who he actually was. So yeah, they meet indoors in the movie and not outdoors as in the book, and it's Susan who approaches Mears in the book, unlike Mears who arrives at Larry Crockett's office. But later in the story, she basically asks him for a date at the drive-in without actually asking him out. So that's that. Interestingly, in this scene at the drive-in, which is supposed to be their first date, the two of them speak freely for the first time, and Susan tells Ben about all the dirty little secrets that the townsfolk have. She was basically trying to say that the people of the town are into some sins, and Mr. King's novel is all about this. He mentions in the book how the town of Salem's Lot was always a dark one, plagued by an air of evil, and it was as if Salem's Lot was expecting an evil as great as Barlow because, you know, many small evils often end up attracting one enormous one. The final confrontation is a den of differences, some very objectionable. The main story in the book basically ends at Ava's boarding house where Ben was staying after arriving in Salem's Lot. Now, this was also the place where Mr. Barlow had taken up residence, of course, along with his freshly baked batch of cold-blooded vampires. The main fight between the good guys and the bad guys takes place here, which kinda irks me because I believe the Marston Mansion would have been the perfect locale to end Barlow's spree of horrors. Nevertheless, Mears successfully stabs Barlow in the heart with a wooden stake, but not without struggles. After this, Mears and Mark leave Salem's Lot. They manage to escape the remaining vampires because they were both drenched in holy water. But this isn't what happened in the movie, because here, the final showdown takes place at the Salem's Lot drive-in. The 2024 adaptation treats it as a place where the entire town could gather without any troubles. Furthermore, during their first date at the drive-in, Mears spots a bunch of kids coming out of the back of their friend's car in order to get past the ticket counter. It didn't seem important initially, but at the end of the movie, the bad guys use their car trunks as makeshift coffins. Anyways, even in the movie, Mears manages to stab Barlow, but yeah, not at the boarding house. The town's vampires are not initially eliminated. So, as mentioned earlier, Mears and Mark escape after destroying Barlow, but here's where it gets interesting. You see, the two of them return around 12 months after the events at Ava's boarding house to burn the place to the ground. By place, we mean the entire town. The fire was supposed to act as a cleansing agent against the filth of vampires and the evil they brought with them. In the movie, however, Mark takes control of one of the cars and starts driving into the wooden structures that were supporting the giant screen at the drive-in. This allows the sun to reach the ground, and all the vampires, who were conveniently out in the open, get burnt up, unlike the book where a fire is set to kill them. Destroy them. The terminology differences between demons and monsters is always a little tricky. Regardless, in the end, when Mark shows a bit of skepticism about all the vampires being dead, Mears assures him that they're gone. Now, the film doesn't hint at any plot point that would suggest their return, but if they're to make a sequel, I'm sure they'll find a way. Now, one of the most important characters in the movie was Homelander's son, aka Dany Glick, and of course his younger brother. Let's explore them for a bit. Dany and Ralphie meet their fates elsewhere. Interestingly enough, the two young brothers, Dany and Ralphie Glick, both of them are abducted instead of just Ralphie, and he gets sacrificed at the cemetery. We're a bit confused about one thing though. We're not sure if the sacrifice was intended for Barlow or some other higher entity that would ultimately give rise to Barlow. If you're someone who's read the book, we would definitely want to know your thoughts. Nevertheless, in the film, Straker kidnaps the two kids after they go into the forest to avoid Straker, the strange man in a big car on a deserted road. The only thing that's worse than a terrible horror movie is a silly victim. We were happy that Dany decided to stay away from Straker, who offered the kids a lift, but since young Ralphie was using the harmonica throughout the way given to him by Mark, Straker manages to find them even in the dark. Ralphie is abducted and taken to the Marston mansion, where he's sacrificed to Barlow, who kills and feasts on Ralphie. Oh, and in the book, they were on their way to Mark's house, in contrast with the movie where they're returning from there. Additionally, while Dany comes back home safe and sound, albeit with the serious mental trauma caused by his brother's disappearance before his eyes, in the book, he emerges from the woods all alone, sickly, and injured. It becomes clear that something sinister happened to him in the woods, but what exactly? Well, Mr. King leaves that a bit ambiguous, and it seems like he does so intentionally. Dany the vampire played a much smaller role. After emerging from the woods, Dany is diagnosed with pernicious anemia and admitted into a hospital, only to die and become a vampire, the first one of the town to be precise. This also happens in the movie, as in Dany becoming the first vampire. Following this, both sources have Dany come to Mark's house to turn him into a creature of the night, but Mark fights Dany. His mortal cross does hurt Dany and sends him away so that he could come back another night to achieve his goal. However, in the book, Dany and Mark don't meet again after this point. All we read about Dany is that he joins a group of child vampires to haunt the town, more specifically, the bus driver called Charlie, who isn't a very nice man, especially to kids. In what seems like a twisted form of poetic justice, the child vampires lure him to his own school bus and devour him. After this, we don't read about Dany any longer, and it's possible he was burnt and destroyed when Mark and Mears set the town on fire a year later. The movie, however, makes Dany more important. After turning into a vampire, Dany considers Mark a personal target or an enemy after the encounter in Mark's room. Dany appears before Mark once again while he's at an antique shop belonging to Barlow and Straker looking for Barlow. Here, Mark manages to put a stake through Dany's heart, thereby freeing his soul and giving it peace, something that Mark had promised initially. Susan, and not Burke, infiltrated Marston Mansion. In the book, it was actually Susan and Mark who infiltrated the Marston Mansion. Needless to say, it doesn't go well for either of them, as Mark is caught by Straker and tied up, while Susan, well, let's just say things didn't go well for her. Much like in the movie, Mark kills Straker after freeing himself but fails to help Susan and is forced to run with his life. In the movie, however, instead of Susan, it's Burke, the school teacher, who goes into Marston House to research Barlow and Straker. Poor decision-making skills, of course. The rest of the scene plays out similarly, as Straker is killed by Mark after he frees himself from his bonds, and Burke is killed by Barlow in the cellar. Burke's story ends as Mears stabs Vampire Burke in the heart with a wooden stake. Susan's fate. Of course, from the previous entry, it must be clear that Susan Norton's fate in the novel and the movie are different. Needless to say, she's one of the most tragic characters in the entire story. I mean, right from the get-go, she was a smart, beautiful, independent young woman who came back to town to support her mother. How many kids do that? Yet, she met Barlow at a time and under circumstances when no one was really ready to face him. When the other vampire hunters come to find Barlow at Marston House, they find Susan here, all vampired up. Like Mears kills Burke in the movie, in the book he kills Susan. Now, what's interesting is that in the movie she has a much larger role, which could be attributed to creative and cinematic reasons. I mean, you can't have the leading lady die so early in the movie, so she plays a much larger role when it comes to helping the vampire hunters against the threat that has blanketed the Knights of Salem's lot. She gets bitten and turned, but Mears brings her to the church where she kind of fights Mears before fleeing. She later appears at the end of the movie at the drive-in along with all the other vampires. Here, Alfred Woodard's character of Dr. Cody tells Mears that it must be him who kills her. But like, why did it have to be him? I mean, it could be for narrative reasons, but I think just about anybody else could have plunged that stake into her heart. Regardless, a little while later, it is Mears who finally does the deed, but by now, the human-vampire couple was fighting tooth and nail, so Mears killing his girlfriend had less of an impact. I mean, imagine how it must have felt if he would have had to kill his girlfriend who was simply sleeping, albeit in a coffin or a car trunk serving as one. Susan's mother does fewer terrible things in the book. In the movie, Susan's mother, Anne Norton, is an important character from the beginning. She's also the best example of how the vampires can make someone become their worst and how he brings out the evil that resides deep inside of you and may not otherwise reach the surface. The vampire lord's influence is the crux of Salem's Lot, wouldn't you agree? So, after Mark kills Straker in the new adaptation, Barlow finds himself without a familiar or a human servant. So, Barlow gets himself Mrs. Anne Norton as his new servant, whom he promises riches and a life of luxury, and gives in. You see, she had always been a rather greedy woman who wanted a comfortable life, apart from wishing her daughter married to her ex-boyfriend Floyd Tibbets. When the group disperses to bring their loved ones to the church, Susan and Mears arrive at the former's home to bring her mother, but she isn't interested. She employs her daughter to join Barlow, and in the chaos, a vampiric Tibbets bites Anne, thereby infecting her. Next, we meet Mrs. Norton at the drive-in, where she was protecting the sleeping vampires during the day. She becomes the reason behind the death of another important character here, but Mark manages to kill Mrs. Norton by running her over with the same car that he used to bring down the giant screen. In the book, however, things play out differently. Firstly, she's not as important in the book as she is in the movie. Like in the movie, she doesn't approve of Susan's relationship with an outsider like Mears and wants her daughter to settle down with Tibbets. Mrs. Norton and Tibbets try to do Barlow's bidding, but she doesn't kill anyone. Yeah, she tries to kill Burke at the local hospital, but that's about it. She dies instead and fails to become a vampire. To be honest, she wasn't really given as much importance in the novel as she was in the movie. We believe this is one of the few changes from the book that worked out perfectly. Her character development from a cunning and selfish woman into a full-fledged villain was nice to watch. Father Callaghan's fate is one of the bigger changes. In Stephen King's novel, Father Callaghan's journey is far from over when the story ends. After his faith takes a nosedive during his showdown with the vampire Barlow, he's left alive but tainted with vampire blood. A real buzzkill for a priest. He drifts into alcoholism on the streets of New York before wandering into the Dark Tower series. There, he gets a shot at redemption. Facing off against vampires once more, his faith finally holds steady. Although he's killed, he helps his friends escape and gives Roland the Gunslinger a leg up on his quest. However, movie adaptations seem to prefer giving Father Callaghan a more conclusive and less wandering fate. In the 1979 film, Barlow doesn't beat around the bush and simply kills him. The 2004 miniseries takes a different turn. Callaghan becomes Barlow's new human sidekick. Not ideal for a man of the cloth. Mark Petrie ends up killing him in a hospital, neatly tying up that loose end. Fast forward to the 2024 movie adaptation, and Father Callaghan follows a path similar to his 1979 counterpart. The film plays up his fears early on, openly showing his struggles with faith. He's not exactly eager to lead the charge into the creepy Marston house. In a tense kitchen scene at the Petrie's home, he confronts Barlow after the vampire had just turned Mark's parents into dinner. Unfortunately, his faith fails him once again. Barlow kills him, and later on, Ben and Dr. Cody discover his body alongside Mark's parents. So, while the book lets Father Callaghan's story spill over into other novels and gives him a chance at redemption, the 2024 movie wraps things up more neatly and grimly by having him exit the stage early, much like the previous film adaptations. It seems Hollywood prefers their priests either heroic or decidedly dead, leaving less room for wandering sagas and more for final showdowns. I again have a question here for you. So we all know that Father Callaghan's cross failed to stop Barlow because the priest had lost his faith, right? But who did he lose his faith in? God or himself? I mean, he definitely believed in God and had little faith in him, because throughout the movie, he takes his job pretty seriously and doesn't deviate for a moment from what he's supposed to do as a godly man. He even gives a whole speech about the power of the church when Mears, Dr. Cody, and Susan go to him with the issue. Was it like he lost his faith in himself? I mean, he had become an alcoholic and maybe believed that he wasn't strong or worthy enough to do God's work any longer. Let us know your thoughts on this complex character arc in the comment section down below. The book didn't explain how Mark survived the night. In both the book and the 2024 movie adaptation of Salem's Lot, poor Mark Petrie loses his parents when Barlow, the not-so-friendly neighborhood vampire, drops by uninvited, just as Father Callaghan is trying to convince them they're in grave danger. In the novel, Mark simply appears at Matt Burke's hospital room where the vampire hunters are gathered, and they plan their final successful attempt to take down Barlow. With the town overrun by vampires, his quiet arrival at the hospital feels a bit too convenient. The movie, however, decides to show us exactly how Mark survives the night. which, let's be honest, is a helpful touch. After fleeing his home, where does he go? His backyard treehouse, of course. Because when vampires are on the prowl, a wooden box in a tree is the place to be. While he's up there, the town's vampirized children gather around, creepily asking him to come out and play from the branches. It's like the horror version of a playdate gone wrong. Interestingly, even though it's not explicitly stated, the treehouse seems to follow classic vampire rules. They just can't enter without an invitation. So Mark spends what must be the most uncomfortable night ever, huddled in his treehouse while the undead kids lurk below. Come morning, likely sleep deprived and definitely traumatized, he climbs down, determined to find Barlow and join the fight. By adding this sequence, the movie fills a logical gap from the book, showing us how Mark evades the vampires when the entire town is against him. It adds tension and gives viewers a clearer picture of his rough yet resilient journey, something the book glosses over, but the film brings vividly to life. So yeah, another welcome change. Sheriff Parkins Gillespie. In Stephen King's original Salem's Lot, a former sheriff, Parkins Gillespie, is one of the lucky, or not so lucky, survivors. He moves in with his sister in Kittery, a real town by the way, and becomes tight-lipped about his former job. Basically, he's painted as a coward who hightails it out of town when vampires crash the party, leaving the folks he swore to protect in deep trouble. The first two adaptations of the story stick to the script, but the 2004 miniseries cuts him a bit of slack. It shows him in a more sympathetic light. He's got a new grandchild, and he decides that maybe running away isn't such a bad idea if it means keeping his family safe. Now, the 2024 movie takes a different route, giving him a fate that's a bit more, shall we say, karmically satisfying. Veteran actor William Sadler plays Gillespie as a friendly but lazy sheriff who's basically counting down the days to retirement. When vampires start knocking, he's done what he's always done, runs for the hills. But this time, the vampires aren't letting him off that easy. As our heroes take refuge in the church, desperately trying to stop Susan from joining the fan club, the vampires send a not-so-subtle message. They toss Gillespie's bloody corpse right through the stained glass window. This twist gives his character a more fitting end compared to the book and earlier adaptations, where he simply slinks away into obscurity. So, while the book lets Gillespie fade into the background as a coward who abandons his town, the 2024 film serves up some poetic justice. It shows that sometimes running away doesn't save you, it just delays the inevitable, especially when vampires are involved. Dr. Cody. In both Stephen King's novel and the 2024 movie adaptation, the character Cody is the last vampire hunter to meet an unfortunate end, leaving Ben Mears and Mark Petrie to make a run for it. In the book, King gives Cody a particularly nasty send-off. Stumbling around in Barlow's dark cellar, he fails to notice some missing stairs, who hasn't been there, and takes a dive onto spikes conveniently planted in the floor. Not exactly the retirement plan he had in mind. This 2004 miniseries sticks closely to this grim exit but decides to crank up the gore by swapping out the spikes for an electric buzzsaw, because nothing says finale like buzzsaw cameo. The 1979 version takes a different route, with Barlow's loyal sidekick Straker doing the honors by impaling Cody on a wall adorned with horns and antlers. It's like a hunting lodge gone horribly wrong. Now, the 2024 film shakes things up quite a bit. Cody is portrayed by Alfre Woodard, marking a change in both race and gender for the character. She takes on the central role in the quest to hunt down Barlow, adding a fresh dynamic to the story. But when it comes to her fate, the film takes a sharp turn. Just as she's about to stake a vampirized Susan, who's conveniently snoozing in the trunk of her car, and Norton shoots her dead. Despite the change in circumstances, the timing aligns with the original novel. Cody is the last vampire hunter to fall, after which Ben and Mark gear up to take on Barlow. So, while her role and demise differ from previous versions, the essence of her character's journey remains. So, the 2024 movie gives Cody a new identity and a different exit strategy, adding a modern twist to the classic tale. It highlights how adaptations can reinvent characters while still honoring the core of the original story. Burke's heart attack. In the book, Dr. Jimmy Cody gets roped into the town's bizarre happenings thanks to Matthew Burke. Poor Matt has a run-in with a vampire, Mike Ryerson, which scares him so much he has a heart attack. He ends up stuck in the hospital for the rest of the story, but being bedridden doesn't stop this high school teacher. From his hospital bed, Matt becomes the team's go-to researcher on how to tackle Barlow and his growing vampire fan club. His condition conveniently brings Dr. Cody into the mix as an ally. Sadly, Matt doesn't make it out of the hospital alive. Now, The 2024 movie adaptation shakes things up. Matt's heart attack and hospital stay completely gone, but don't think he gets off easy. Instead, after he catches young Mark Petrie breaking into the creepy Marston house, Matt meets his end in the cellar. Mark is then taken hostage by Straker, adding more drama to the mix. So, while the book has Matt contributing from his hospital bed and drawing Dr. Cody into the vampire hunting squad, the movie entirely skips the medical drama. Dr. Cody still plays a crucial role, but Matt's demise happens differently, changing how events unfold. The adaptation gives us a more active Matt right up until he isn't. Marston House is scarier in the book. In the 2024 movie, the Marston House doesn't have quite the same eerie presence it boasts in Stephen King's original novel. In the book, this old mansion practically breathes malevolence, looming over the town as a constant reminder of its sinister past. Likely due to time constraints, the film trims much of the home's dark history and the story of its former owner, Hubie Marston. While he's briefly mentioned, the movie skips over Hubie's grim tale and his connection to the vampire Barlow. In King's short, Hubie Marston was a mobster who sought refuge in Salem's lot. His descent into madness led to horrific acts, culminating in a murder-suicide that left a wicked stain on the house. It's hinted that his actions essentially rolled out the red carpet for Barlow's arrival in Maine. Hubie's torment of his wife Birdie ends tragically when he takes her life before ending his own. This backstory turns the Marston house into a vessel of evil, setting the stage for the chilling events that unfold when Ben Mears and Barlow come to town. The movie, however, doesn't dive into this haunting history. Without Hubie's full story, the Marston house becomes more of a spooky backdrop than a character in its own right. This shift changes the atmosphere significantly, making the house less of a looming threat and more of just a creepy old building. The omission alters the dynamic between the characters and the setting, giving the film a different feel compared to the novel's deep-rooted sense of dread. Ben has more backstory in the book. In the movie, Ben Mears is still our main character, this time portrayed by Lewis Pullman, but the movie takes some creative detours from Stephen King's 1975 novel. For starters, in the book, young Ben moves to Jerusalem's lot to live with his aunt after his father's death and his mother's inability to care for him. He spends 4 years there and leaves after a devastating town fire. In the movie, however, Ben mentions that he left town after a drunk driver tragically killed his parents. The film also cuts Ben's eerie childhood experience with the Marston house. In the novel, he had a haunting encounter in that creepy mansion as a boy, which is a major reason he returns to Jerusalem's lot. The movie skips this spine-chilling detail, removing his personal connection to the house. But the latest version omits Ben's wife, Miranda, and her death. Instead, the tragedy is shifted to his parents' demise. So, while Ben still comes back to town seeking closure, his reasons are a bit different this time around. In short, the movie rewrites Ben's history by altering his family tragedies and erasing his spooky encounter with the Marston house. These changes tweak his motivations and the depth of his connection to Jerusalem's lot, giving the audience a fresh take on his journey. Redacted or axed characters. Stephen King's original novel is jam-packed with townsfolk, far more than any of the adaptations have squeezed in. The 2024 movie, being the shortest of them all, does an impressive job of streamlining the story, but that means many characters have been, well, shown the door. Say goodbye to the likes of philandering lovers Corey Bryant and Bonnie Sawyer, trash collector Dud Rogers, and Ruthie Crockett, Dud's love interest and the daughter of the shady realtor Larry Crockett. Some folks are only briefly mentioned. Grumpy bus driver Charlie Rogers, for instance, gets a nod when someone spray paints "Charlie Eats It" on his bus. Even Larry Crockett himself, who plays a significant role in the book, barely gets a scene in the movie. In the novel, these characters come with rich subplots that delve into their lives and misdeeds before the vampire Barlow turns their town upside down. The new film simply doesn't have the time to explore all that drama. To address the sheer number of missing characters and storylines, the movie tweaks the narrative. Early on, during Susan and Ben's first date at the drive-in, Susan plays tour guide to the town's gossip mill. She points out the occupants of various cars and dishes out the juicy rumors about them. This clever scene offers a quick rundown on King's many subplots, giving newcomers a flavor of the town's underbelly, all while keeping the runtime under 2 hours. So, while the 2024 adaptation trims down the cast list significantly, it finds a way to acknowledge the missing characters. It provides just enough crumbs to let viewers in on the town's secrets without needing a mini-series to cover it all. In doing so, the film maintains the essence of King's intricate world, but delivers it in a neat, time-efficient package. So yeah, that's the 16 differences we found between the movie and the book. But you know what? There's just one more thing we want to talk about, and that's a particular fire that goes kind of unexplored even in the book. Ben's ongoing tension is tied to why he had to leave Jerusalem's lot as a kid. It wasn't until a second read, knowing the book ends with Ben setting a fire to eliminate the vampires, that the numerous references to the Fire of 51 stood out. That fire devastated much of the town and is actually why Ben had to leave. He explains, "I lived with my aunt Cindy, Cynthia Stowins. My dad passed away and my mom had a bit of a nervous breakdown, so she sent me off to Aunt Cindy's while she pulled herself together. Aunt Cindy put me on a bus back to Long Island and my mom just about a month after the big fire." Gazing at his reflection behind the soda fountain, he adds, "I cried on the bus leaving mom, and I cried on the bus leaving Aunt Cindy and Jerusalem's lot." Susan chimes in, "I was born the year of the fire, the biggest thing that ever happened to this town, and I slept through it." This certainly hints at what's to come for Susan, but for Ben, this background doesn't really influence his later choices. The emotional baggage from his childhood, bouncing between his mom and his aunt, doesn't visibly impact his actions. It's interesting that he has such a personal link to the big fire, and by starting a similar fire at the end, it could symbolize him taking control instead of being a victim. However, the story doesn't develop this connection enough to make Ben feel like a real fleshed out character, even though he's the supposed human hero. It's almost like he's intentionally similar to the undead vampires. His issues with his mom and Aunt Cindy are his true emotional burdens, which the spooky encounter with Hubie Marston's corpse is supposed to symbolize. But the narrative focuses too much on the sensational description of that encounter without exploring its deeper meaning. As a result, it feels hollow, designed to shock rather than to delve into significant themes. It's like a soap opera moment, a brief melodramatic peak without much substance. Unfortunately, none of the adaptations have explored this part in any decent depth. And that's kind of the last thing we have to talk about. This is Wizard Wheezy signing off for now, but if you liked our content, don't forget to leave us a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.